This is East-West Rail, one of the most ambitious railway megaprojects currently under construction in the United Kingdom. Once complete, this new line will reconnect Oxford and Cambridge for the first time in nearly 60 years, running through Milton Keynes and Bedford along the way. With a total public cost estimated between £5.7 billion and £6.6 billion, it's one of Britain's largest regional rail investments in recent decades. But behind the promise of faster journeys and regional growth, the project is already facing delays, funding uncertainty, and a labour dispute that has kept trains sitting idle on brand new track. Picture this: a fully built, fully tested railway line with trained drivers, a renovated station, and a successful test run already completed. And still, not a single paying passenger has been able to board a train. That's the strange reality on the Oxford to Milton Keynes stretch of East-West Rail right now. The infrastructure is finished. The controversy is not. For a country that hasn't seen a direct rail link between these two university cities since the 1960s, this stalled launch has become a symbol of everything critics say is wrong with how Britain delivers big infrastructure. Years of planning, billions in spending, and a launch date that keeps slipping further away. That absence of a direct link goes back decades. The original railway connecting them, known as the Varsity Line, was largely closed in the late 1960s as part of the infamous Beeching Cuts, which gutted much of Britain's rural rail network. Ever since, anyone travelling between these two world-famous university cities has had to go via London, turning what should be a straightforward trip into a lengthy journey. The idea of reviving that connection has been around since 1995, when a group of local councils formed what became the East-West Rail Consortium. For years, it remained mostly an ambition on paper. That changed in 2017 when the government created East-West Railway Company, a dedicated body tasked with actually delivering the line. Since then, the project has moved from concept to construction, though not without turbulence. The region this railway is meant to serve is no small corner of the country. The Oxford to Cambridge corridor generates over £143 billion a year for the UK economy and is home to around 2 million people while supporting more than 1 million jobs, many of them in high-skill research, technology, and life sciences. Government officials have described the ambition bluntly. They want this stretch of England to become Europe's answer to Silicon Valley. The railway is being sold as the connective tissue that finally lets that happen. Let's talk about how the project is structured. East-West Rail is being delivered in 3 connection stages. The first stage rebuilds and upgrades track between Oxford, Bicester and Bletchley near Milton Keynes. That construction work was actually completed back in 2024, and a test train successfully ran the route that October. The second stage focuses on the Bletchley to Bedford section, known as the Marston Vale Line, refurbishing aging infrastructure to support faster, more frequent trains. The third and final stage is the big one, an entirely new stretch of railway between Bedford and Cambridge, built largely from scratch since that section of track disappeared decades ago. Now here's where things get complicated. Even though construction on the first stage finished in 2024, passenger trains still aren't running. A dispute with rail unions over proposed driver-only operation has held up the launch of services between Oxford and Milton Keynes. Operator Chiltern Railways has trained 44 new drivers and finished fitting out the new station at Winslow. But the promised opening date came and went. As of mid-2026, the government has only said that provision will be made for the service in the December 2026 timetable, without actually committing to a launch date. Meanwhile, the scope of the project keeps expanding. In January 2025, the government confirmed funding to accelerate work on the Bedford to Cambridge stretch, backed by an additional £240 million to speed up delivery. Later that year, the Labour government committed a further £2.5 billion toward the overall scheme. The plans now include 7 brand new stations, among them a station at Stewartby that could help serve the proposed universal theme park development in Bedfordshire, expected to draw over 8.5 million visitors in its opening year alone. There's also a new station planned at Cambridge East, and upgraded entrances at Cambridge, Bletchley and Bedford. To put the scale of this in perspective, the Marston Vale line that East West Rail is rebuilding currently has some of the lowest passenger usage of any rail corridor in the country, with stations that have seen barely any investment since the 1960s. Turning that neglected branch line into a key artery serving a major new theme park and a fast-growing tech corridor is a significant jump. And it's part of why the project's backers describe it as more than just a railway. They're framing it as the foundation for an entirely new economic region, built around track that, until recently, most people assumed would never see a train again. As for what the finished railway will look like, trains will run at up to 100 miles per hour on the double-track Oxford to Bletchley section, while the older Bletchley to Bedford stretch will be capped at 60 miles per hour until upgrades catch up. The line won't be fully electrified at first. The railway is expected to use a mix of electrification and alternative traction technologies, with battery electric trains among the options being considered. The approach is intended to deliver greener, faster services without the enormous cost of wiring the entire route from day one. Now let's talk about the money, because this is where the project draws real scrutiny. The total public cost for East West Rail is currently estimated at somewhere between £5.7 billion and £6.6 billion, a range that itself tells you how much uncertainty still surrounds the final bill. Unlike a stadium project funded partly by a wealthy owner, this is almost entirely public money, funneled through the Department for Transport and delivered by East West Railway Company, a government-owned arm's-length body. Critics point out that the project's own economic case is weak by conventional standards. A 2023 report from the National Audit Office noted that the benefit-cost ratio for East West Rail is poor when judged on its own, and that its justification instead rests on a broader strategic bet. That connecting Oxford and Cambridge will unlock housing and economic growth that a narrow transport analysis can't fully capture. The government argues the railway could support up to 100,000 new homes and add £6.7 billion a year to the regional economy by 2050. Whether that pays off is for now a forecast rather than a fact. It's also worth noting how wide that £5.7 billion to £6.6 billion range actually is. A nearly £1 billion gap between the low and high estimates, on a project that hasn't even finished its final round of consultations, suggests the real number could still move once construction begins in earnest on the Bedford to Cambridge section. Large UK rail projects have a well-documented history of costs climbing well past initial estimates once ground is actually broken. And with the central section not expected to start construction until around 2030, there's a long runway left for that number to change. For a project justified less by its own financial return, and more by the economic activity it's expected to unlock decades from now, that kind of uncertainty makes it an easy target for critics who question whether the money might be better spent elsewhere. There's also the question of sequencing. The full Oxford to Cambridge connection, the entire point of the project's name, isn't expected to be finished for years yet. East West Railway Company only launched what it's calling its final public consultation on the Bedford to Cambridge section in April 2026, with a development consent order, the formal legal authorization to build, not expected until 2027. Construction on that central, entirely new section of railway is anticipated to run from around 2030 onward. In other words, more than a decade after the modern revival effort began, passengers still can't ride a train straight from Oxford to Cambridge and won't be able to for several years more. Supporters argue the delays are the price of doing this properly. Building the Oxford to Bletchley stage inside the existing rail corridor let engineers avoid years of extra land acquisition and planning battles. Extending that same careful, if slow, approach to the Bedford to Cambridge section means new stations, new bridges, and new track have to be designed around dozens of communities that haven't seen a railway running through them in half a century. For now, East West Rail sits in an unusual position, partly finished, partly under negotiation, and partly still just lines on a consultation map. the first physical trains have already rolled over new track. The prospect of a major universal theme park nearby has only increased the importance of the railway. But whether the full Oxford to Cambridge vision arrives on budget and on time remains one of the more closely watched questions in British infrastructure. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this one, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next deep dive into the world's biggest mega projects. See you next time.